All right. Well, welcome to Leadership in Action. I'm Renee Meddy, Senior Partner at Orca HR, and I'm here with Paul O'Byrne, our CEO. If you're new this week, we show up weekly for 15 minutes on Thursdays to share common leadership pitfalls and challenges with actionable tips you can take away. And today we are talking about emotional intelligence. So, Paul, where do you feel emotional intelligence falls in organizations and leadership?
Well, it's funny you asked that. And I think, one of the things that I was kind of reflecting on and what even motivated me to get into sort of organizational work or working with organizations was got back in college when I was doing my degree. They talked about, organizational structures, but then they said the thing that keeps organizations together is the psychological cement, not just the organizational cement. And that kind of made me sort of curious to think about, well, what does that really mean? And, I through my career, I've often heard a lot of people say, oh, well, that's just the soft skills. That people, but it's the hard skills that are most important. And so I think, one of the questions that I would ask people who tune into this is, do they believe that emotional intelligence is like strategic or is it like, soft? And what's your default belief around that? Because I think that also determines sometimes your kind of openness to exploring this and sort of seeing emotional intelligence as being really strategic as you lead versus it's kind of okay, yeah, maybe it's a nice to have, but it's not really a must have. So that's just some initial thoughts.
Yeah, and I think the emotional intelligence is at play whether you're aware of it or not. So how do you bring intention to it, in the workplace?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think people just being aware of, it's not, and there's this famous thing, it's not kind of what you said that I remember, it's how you made me feel, I remember. And so understanding that, there's that sort of emotional connection between people. And when you have engagements or you have conversations, how do they come away from that? Do they come away, in what we would call that sort of move away towards behavior, fight, flight, or fright, or do they move towards behavior? So having an understanding of that, it can be incredibly powerful in terms of your ability to influence and impact and create an environment where people are motivated to do their best.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the default. I think one of the challenges I run into with people often is it is mostly default and no introspection or reflection of, again, bringing the intentionality to it. How am I showing up in front of people? And that will, once you understand your own emotional intelligence and what are the things that activate you, what are the things around your team, and either what they're being reactive towards or how they feel about emotional intelligence, whether it's something that's an optional thing, can play a big part in the actions that both the leader and the team take. What are some of the pitfalls you see?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that, like, we've been talking about, and you just mentioned it, like your own self-awareness is first, and then your sort of ability to self-regulate in that. But then there's, a big part of emotional intelligence is social awareness and social regulation, right?
Yeah.
And so, as you said, yes, when you start with yourself, but you also have to be able to, kind of read the room and be sensitive to, well, what's going on. So it's like, well, how do I feel about that? And then sort of empathy is kind of like, can I sort of see how other people may see that? It's like, am I standing under the same umbrella that they are. If it's raining, if they see it's raining, well, they see it's raining, maybe I don't see it,
Yeah.
right? So I think that social awareness is really critical, and that's what a lot of people often talk to about as that empathy of being able to stand in that other shoes, you know.
Well, a
And
lot of
it's
that social awareness is nonverbal.
a lot of it is nonverbal,
Yeah, like
right?
60 to 90% of it is nonverbal.
Yeah, and I remember, coaching a very senior leader, and he had this very interruptive style. Where he would go in, incredibly intelligent individual, would go into a meeting and he would literally sort of take over the meeting and be sort of very critical of other people's ideas. But he had no social awareness of the impact that it was having on these people.
Mm. Yeah.
And it was only when we actually worked with him on his own self awareness and him being able to sort of slow down and sort of see this, he was able to see the impact it was have and how he could shift that impact from it being a very sort of negative experience that people were having to a much more positive experience and actually getting a hell of a lot more out of his team as a result of it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you like where do you start with leaders that maybe don't feel that emotional intelligence is important to prioritize? Because like I'll hear feedback like we don't have time for that, or some people feel like it's not a skill that you can learn. It's like you either have it or you don't.
I usually start with one, kind of just getting them to notice certain things, like just even notice, for example, with this particular individual, at first he was kind of a little resistant because he sort of thought, he was the smartest person in the room and stuff like that. But when I got him to sort of say, well, what was the impact of his both his behavior on the others, and what if he came in and sort of experimented in doing something different? So, like one of the things that I got this individual to do was be the last person to talk,
How did
right?
he do?
Well, it was hard for him at first,
Hard at
right?
the beginning, yeah.
But then he actually started noticing that other people were engaging more, right? And that he was getting even better ideas from people. And even though he kind of like still had this kind of very interruptive thing where he felt, oh my God, I need, look, this, he also had this thing with time, where he wanted to always sort of move forward and get things done and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he knew the answer and he wanted to sort of close it off and move forward. And so that was hard for him. So I think a lot of it is kind of experimentation and testing and noticing,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and start in small steps,
Mhm.
and then
Yeah.
sort of see what comes out of it,
Hmm.
What about your thoughts around kind of like people who are pretty resistant?
Yeah. I usually, well, kind of the core foundation for me for emotional intelligence is connection. The more connected you feel to people and the more self aware you are, gives you and the other person some like relevance or something to connect on. And so sometimes I'll start lower stakes for some leaders is something that's not work related, that is, sometime in their life or something a little not something personal, but in their personal life
Right.
that they can resonate with, that then you can bridge the gap a little easier. Because I find that a lot of leaders, even within coaching them, the mask or the perception that they need to already know, or they need to put on, a certain face, because of their role or whatever uh, organization they're in. So before we even talk about like the actual skill of emotional intelligence, it's building that connection with them and gaining trust, and then doing a smaller, less riskier personal thing, because work for a lot of people that I work with is very much tied to their identity. And so, yeah, so that's the connection piece will resonate with some. And then for people that are really, really in their head more, talking about, it's much easier to talk about other people. So sometimes I'll ask, like, tell me a situation where, and I won't call it emotional intelligence, but you saw, some reactivity and you thought to yourself, wow, that could have been handled better, or that could have been said differently. Because it's much easier for people to talk about other people than themselves first. So then once they can usually roll on that for a pretty long time. Okay, so is there anywhere in your life, personal or professional, where you've done the same thing? And so taking those like small bridges instead of like the big leap.
Yeah, and and sometimes like sort of the whole the sort of emotional intelligence has sort of five factors on it, and sometimes just having, I find, if you ask people to sort of say, okay, what am I? So start with themselves, with their what am I aware of? So I remember doing this with some people who were on the front line of cybersecurity threats, you know? And one of the things is we got them to start thinking about, okay, how am I feeling? How am my ability to regulate in these very reactive moments? But then before they take actions, how might other people be feeling
Yeah.
about this, right?
Yeah.
And then how do I move forward with that common awareness? So I
Yeah.
think, with emotional intelligence, it's sort of that aspect of self and others, and sort of being able to bring those two things together and sort of see that as something that's not just like a soft skill, but can be very strategically used in problem solving. It can be very strategically used in transitions. It can be very strategically used in connecting with people. It can be very strategically used with motivating your teams, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I had a thought when you were talking. Oh, tying it to last week's episode about self-regulation under pressure for us
Yeah.
as a leader. And then once you create that space for yourself, you're able to see in others on your team where they might be dysregulated, or where becoming aware of like what direction do they take, what's their default under pressure, is going to give you different actions that you would want to take if you're aware of it versus if you're not. So some of the 4 A's that we talk about
Yeah.
often is, that's why awareness is first, and I'd say probably over 40% or over 50% of where you spend your time is in your self-awareness, so that you can acknowledge, take action, and adapt as needed in the moment, and hold the space for your team to be able to do that as well.
Yeah. And as I kind of reflect, and we talked about that space and stuff like that. You know, and I think this is kind of one of the other things that sort of really motivated me around, working with leaders and the holistic approach we take, is that if you're only doing, right, as a leader, and as all you're doing is doing, and you're not taking those little breaks to be self-aware, or you're even that time out of your schedule to even just think and reflect on things, right? It's going to be a sort of a cycle of doing without sort of sometimes recognizing what's actually going on. And
Yeah.
so, you kind of have to interrupt the pattern, which is very challenging to do when people are very sort of doers and they see their identity around the doing, as opposed to looking at, okay, how do I integrate not just doing but the being into my leadership.
Yeah. I think,
So that, and it's a journey.
oh
It's,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and I think that's one of the things about the 4A's. It's not, the last A is around adaptation. So it's not kind of like, it's very much an iterative cycle.
yeah. I was gonna say it's not linear. It's you're
It's not
in for
linear.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we had one or two tips for just people to kind of think about how could they think about emotional intelligence in a different way and give them sort of great competitive advantage, what would be one last idea you would share?
Yeah, I mean, I think the if you did not like study or intend to be a leader and you fell into it, you would pretty quickly learn that it's, especially if you're if you were in tech or more on a technical side of things and moved into people leadership, you'd realize fairly quickly whether you're equipped or not for the people side of things. And so I think seeing where your own humans aren't that different among each other. Like we haven't evolved as much as we think we do. So some of those patterns are very similar. So anywhere in your own life where you've felt like it wasn't important, or on the flip side, where you've seen it was like the be all and end all of the thing that was able to change a relationship or get a task completed. I think about just everyday things like how you treat people in the stores, and who goes out of their way to accommodate versus who is resistant, has a lot to do of how you show up, and what attitude you bring to it, what words you bring, and how you ask or how you say things. So paying attention to your language, your tone, your what is your state. If you come blasting into a meeting and frantic, that's going to yield a different result than if you come in and like greet everyone and take a few minutes of genuine connection, not just like how are you, but you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
really
yeah.
care. So yeah, but I think
Yeah, so until next week, then thanks very much, everybody. And thank you
yeah,
again, Renee.
see you then.